Picture the person you love most in this world, a partner, a child, a parent. Now imagine you hold the power to save their life, but doing so requires an exact exchange. 1,000 other human beings, strangers with their own families, histories, and futures, will die instead. The parameters of this scenario are absolute. There is no middle ground and no third option. Preserving the one specific life you know requires the direct, terminal sacrifice of the 1,000 you do not. Most people offer a mathematical answer in the abstract: 1,000 lives outweigh one. But replace the one person with your person, and human intuition recoils from the body count. This tension arises when two entirely different cognitive systems collide in real time. Human morality operates as an ongoing friction between impartial utility and relational hierarchy. The human brain attempts to process ethical dilemmas through parallel, incompatible logical frameworks. The first pathway follows the architecture of impartial utility. In this model, optimal macro outcomes serve as the only metric for success. 1,000 lives saved is the objectively superior result. The second pathway follows the architecture of subjective duty. Here, relational proximity dictates value. These nodes are heavily tethered to a single central point, prioritizing specific obligations over the remaining data. To evaluate our ethical baselines, we must test this specific input against three rigorous philosophical frameworks. Pushing these competing architectures to their absolute limits reveals the actual boundaries of objective fairness in human behavior. This white grid illustrates the consequentialist framework. It converts every human node into uniform data blocks to ensure the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Jeremy Bentham, the father of utilitarianism, described this as arithmetic morality. He believed life and suffering are quantifiable units that can be measured and compared. In Bentham's framework, individuals are perfectly interchangeable. Emotional attachments or physical proximity carry no mathematical weight in the final tally. When we feed our initial scenario into the utilitarian algorithm, the result is an upward optimization curve. 1,000 units of preserved life outweigh one. This pure arithmetic creates intense psychological pressure for the person forced to execute it. However, the logic of emergency triage doctors and global policymakers relies precisely on this emotionless calculation to function. Under strict utilitarian math, prioritizing a loved one constitutes an objective moral failure and a distortion of justice. The utilitarian grid shatters when we introduce deontology, or duty-based ethics. This architecture operates independently of macro outcomes. Immanuel Kant provided the foundational constraint for this mode of moral computation. Kant argued that human agents are ends in themselves. They possess inherent dignity and cannot be used as a means to achieve a larger goal. Applying this constraint to our scenario changes the math. Sacrificing a primary bond to save strangers treats the loved one as an expendable resource. Relational proximity creates specific, non-transferable duties. These categorical obligations bind the agent to the person they know, leaving the background nodes untethered. This duty-based framework overrides aggregate statistical outcomes. The proximity of the bond creates a rule that numbers cannot legitimately breach. In Kantian logic, loyalty and relational duties create a structural firewall that protects the individual from the demands of the many. We can shift our focus to the internal cognitive map of the moral agent. At the center is a load-bearing core of personal integrity. Philosopher Bernard Williams famously criticized the utilitarian demand for total impartiality. He argued that an ethical system must respect the foundational commitments that define a person's identity. These tethers tightly bind the core of integrity to who the agent actually is. If a utilitarian algorithm forcibly cuts those tethers, the entire central agent system destabilizes and fails. Williams identifies these personal priorities as the foundational architecture of human identity. Excising them dismantles the moral subject itself. Empirical psychological data supports this view through the identifiable victim effect. Our cognitive architecture automatically assigns more moral weight to a single named person than to massive statistical aggregates. This raises the question of whether this focus is an evolutionary limitation or the essential mechanism of human loyalty. An ethical system that requires the destruction of the moral agent it seeks to govern is a failed algorithm. Faster, direct. We constantly navigate this exact same friction in our own daily lives through the simple, ongoing process of everyday resource allocation. This split screen maps our behaviors. On the left, we weigh local donations against global need. On the right, familial comfort against systemic poverty. The matrices show that even when distant needs have higher utility, we consistently weight local and familial options heavier. Humans choose their own children over statistically more deserving strangers, in 100 small ways, every single day. Our actions show that we reliably follow the Kant and Williams models in these micro-decisions. We default to our relational tethers because they feel more pressing than abstract data. The choice between 1 and 1,000 is a macro stress test proving that we survive by rejecting pure utilitarian logic. The initial scale returns, overlaid with the Kantian mechwork. The single node, held by tethers, physically outweighs the 1,000 distant nodes. The scenario exposes a permanent, unreconciled tension within human ethics. This forces a choice between two ultimate stakes: universal egalitarianism and moral hierarchy. Pure mathematical fairness requires an almost superhuman detachment from human affection. Conversely, embracing our true moral architecture requires us to admit that we do not believe all lives are equal when it counts. Moral frameworks are pluralistic. Being a functional agent in the world often requires abandoning logic in favor of proximity. Rigorous ethics demands we map the deep, unavoidable costs of these relational decisions. Our moral universe operates on an inner circle, acknowledging the immense, unquantifiable weight of those tethers.